My name is Samantha English, and I am a PhD candidate in the English department at Northwestern University. And today we have three presentations. So they'll be coming from Kelly Curtis, Jennifer Helgren, and Kathleen Murphy. I'm not going to introduce everyone in their totality in their bios, but you can view them on the website later on. But I will introduce each participant as we go through their presentations. And then we'll have some extended time for Q&A at the end of our three panel presenters. So I'm going to get started with Kelly Curtis. Kelly is currently a master's candidate at Southern Connecticut State University, where she serves as the co-vice president of SCSU's Triota and as a graduate assistant in the Women's and Gender Studies Department. Kelly will be presenting a paper titled Feminist Rookie, Revisiting the Site of My First Internet Community, Tavi Gavlison's Rookie Mag and the Formation of Teenage Girlhood Online. So I'll take it over to you, Kelly.
Great, thank you. Just going to share my screen really quick. Can I get some confirmation? People can see my screen, but not my notes. Okay, awesome. Just need to move my, perfect. Awesome. So yeah, I did an autoethnography grounded in girlhood studies for this essay, and it was exploring Rookie Magazine, which was founded in 2011 by Tavi Gevinson. It was an online magazine for and by teenage girls, and it ran until 2018 and now serves as an online archive. You can still look at it and look at all the old posts. It's just no longer being updated. And they had monthly issues, and then blog posts were uploaded 5 days a week, 3 times a day, where, quote, roughly when school ends, when dinner starts, and when it's really late and you should be writing a paper but are Facebook stalking instead, end quote. And it centered the teenage girl experience in a way that was not strictly about consumerism, the way that many magazines that were directed at girls and women at the time were. And for me, I was revisiting Rookie, and I was thinking about it actually after I discovered the Girlhood Studies Collective at a panel at the National Women's Studies Conference Association conference, and was thinking about how, at the time, I didn't understand how formative this site was going to be, but when I was re-looking at it and rethinking about it, I was like, this was really the foundation that formed a lot of my feminist thinking. So a little bit about Tavi. Tavi's an American writer, magazine editor, and actress who rose to fame when she was 11 years old for her blog Style Rookie. She was raised in Oak Park, Chicago, and her blog started to was receiving over 30,000 readers each day, and she was subsequently interviewed for the New York Times and Teen Vogue. She had a fashion column in Harper's Bazaar. She went to New York and Paris Fashion Week. And it would be like blogs of her school outfits, her like interpreting runway shows, commenting on runway shows, talking about music that inspired her, playlists. And it was kind of this like beautiful and wonderful amalgamation. And her style was really unbound by typical rules. She mixed a lot of textures and colors and patterns together in these really beautiful clashing ways. It wasn't always conventionally, quote unquote, attractive styling. And I remember at 12 and 13, like those were the years that were branded by conformity, both in that like I wanted to fit in, I wanted my peers to approve of me, but also because the uniform in my small town were skinny jeans, Ugg boots, and like a branded like Abercrombie and Fitch or Hollister shirt that like said Abercrombie and Fitch on it. And so there was to stand out in a negative way in any way, shape, or form. And so even though I discovered Rookie first and Style Rookie afterwards, Tavi's commitment to like vintage and also what was considered at the time like strange fashion was something I really wanted to embody. And her experience was both equal parts like, oh my gosh, look at this young woman. She has all these wonderful things to say. And also like, how could this teenager, or not even yet like teen, like 11, 12-year-old possibly have anything interesting to say about the fashion industry? And her thoughts on her blog style Rookie, they were earnest, they were sharp, they were thoughtful, they were funny, they were rambling, but they were very clearly written by a peer and like by a child of her age. And yet her early success was often marked by people criticizing her and like could not believe that her writing was not observed by a parent or her older sister. So she experienced what it was like to have her intelligence and her creativity insulted and flattened by adults in the fashion industry and by adults in general. And so like Rookie magazine was created as an experience to circumvent that because it was teenagers writing about being teenagers in a way that was more hopefully real and authentic than the manufacture of fashion magazines, which was really about marking who you were by how you shopped and about consumerism. And the other thing that was really interesting about Tavi's rise to fame was that she was uniquely positioned where fashion blogging was not brand new, but it was not yet universally recognized as like a real job. And YouTube video vloggers were still rising up. Social media coordinators like were just also beginning to have a job. So this concept of like having and making a living through the internet specifically that wasn't online journalism was very new. And so it became this new it girl job to succeed in. And in this slide, I included photos of Tavi in different stages of her life, like early in style Rookie, and then when she was 16 and as an adult, and then also photos from my own blog, which you can no longer find anymore, because I wanted to do what Tavi was doing. And so at 16 and 17, I was very invested in fashion and the fashion industry, and like I wanted to work at a fashion magazine. And so Rookie was particularly inspiring for me because it was also like, this is what I want to do with my career. Here we are now a little different, but still talking about Rookie. And Tavi documented a lot, many times on Style Rookie, the impact the 80s and 90s magazine Sassy had on her. And Jane Pratt, it was well noted that Jane Pratt, the founding editor of Sassy, helped mentor Tavi as she launched Rookie, as well as Ira Glass of This American Life. And additionally, she was really heavily inspired by zines and riot girl culture. You could kind of argue that the entire platform of Rookie was set up to be like a zine. So when Rookie magazine was launched, I would say it was like wildly successful. There were 4 Rookie yearbooks for each year of high school. There was a book, Rookie on Love. There was a road trip in the summer of 2012. There was merchandise. There was a podcast. And they did a lot of very similar stuff. It was like advice columns, DIY articles, fashion and beauty tutorials, and then like articles about love and friendship, which was pretty typical for a magazine. But then they kind of expanded upon that by having like comics and poetry and fiction and articles about tech, about like how to make your own app and code your own app, wallpaper, collage kits, like reviews and critiques of movies, conceptual photo shoots, like anything and everything was on the site. And then for me, what was particularly amazing was I was getting, in addition to these wonderful like recommendations for TV shows and these really cool ways to integrate fashion, I was also being introduced to concepts that I had never heard of before. So this was the first website that I was on, maybe outside of Tumblr, where I was getting articles about racism and about queerness and about fat phobia and about like sexual violence and harassment in ways that were maybe like one article was being touched on in a mainstream fashion magazine, but it was being written by an adult who was much older than I was. And this was being written by teenagers my age, some adults, but mostly teens, mixed in instead of being marked and delineated as this, like, this is our one serious article. It was just mixed into all these other topics. So as a child and like as a young girl child, I felt like I was pushed into gendered habits like makeup and fashion by like social expectations, but I also loved it. But there was this assumption that these things would be performed as a habit and not as a hobby. And to have it performed as a hobby was to make you vapid and self-obsessed and vain. At the same time, Rookie was being produced where it was like considered this post-feminist world, and this idea that like we no longer needed feminism because women had achieved all the ideal capitalist gains we would ever need. And it was really this like hegemonic and neoliberal cultural tool that like when we were talking about feminism in a positive way, which we largely weren't, it was like as a political project to celebrate individual achievements, And so that was really the solidification of choice feminism, and that this idea that you really couldn't criticize other women for the choices they were making, because if you were making it as a choice and you were a woman, it was like inherently a feminist choice. So Tavi, having achieved fame using her resources to launch Rookie, was participating in this ideal sense of feminism through this hegemonic guide rail, but was also subverting it by declaring herself to feminists publicly and creating a space for girls to celebrate feminism, and was kind of making feminism relevant again. And it was largely for white teenage girls, because we can't ignore Tavi's identities. Although the site did have a lot of success at integrating many different topics, because Tavi was the editor, like we can't ignore that Rookie was very representative of choice feminism and white feminism and like 2010s capitalist feminism. And one of the things that was pretty distinct was, like Riot Grrrl politics, Rookie also failed to discuss how BIPOC girls and low-income girls were excluded from Riot Grrrl's original stream, and that like mainstream coverage of Tavi and Rookie also failed to comment on Tavi's identities and how Rookie could have engaged with more intersectionality. So it's like this beautifully imperfect project. But for me, I grew up in a really extremely white, extremely homogenous town in northern Idaho that was also very, very racist. And so this was the first site, again, where I was engaging with a lot of introductory topics, but also some higher level topics in this kind of long form content that I got to take at my own pace. And so I was like introduced to this concept of fat phobia for the first time and got to like sit with it and think about it. And then from those introductory articles, even if they weren't always introductory in nature, like they were new to me, I would then get to go and look up other stuff and explore further concepts of feminism. And that really informed, as an adult, my understanding of like community justice and anti-racist work. And so I kind of want to just wrap up a little bit by talking about how it's like without Rookie and without her inspiration from 90s white feminism, there would be no Rookie. So we have to talk about Rookie being imperfect as a project. And yet for me, when I'm as an adult, when I think about Rookie, I think about how wonderful it is that there was this long form content that was a little bit slower that I could return to and be introduced to and mull over things in my own pace, that in a way that like I don't know if that's happening for activism in terms of like what we see the infographics on like Instagram and TikTok, where it's very rapid fire and it is sometimes very difficult to return to the original context of one video which sparks a larger conversation. So you're getting a lot of updates really rapidly, which is amazing because you're staying in context with developing news, but you're also maybe missing the introductory concept of something if it's new to you. And I don't know if Substacks and like newsletters, I know there's this rise, is gonna kind of be that space, but I know for me, you have to know someone, and know as in follow or know someone personally to discover those newsletters that are having those conversations. So it's a little bit more, you have to search for it a little bit more. So I don't yet have an answer. I don't think there will be an answer for like what, for me, that gap that Rookie filled, like what is Rookie for this next generation of teenage girls online. But like now as an adult, what I remember about it being a teenage girl was just like how monotonous it was. And like my skin felt old. Like as a grad student, I still wasn't, I'm tired, but I was so bone numbingly tired at 16. Like college was being dangled in front of me like this carrot that I couldn't ever reach. And like Rookie always seemed to have this answer about a stage of life that I had questions about. And so it remains this like really beautiful living time capsule of the many limitations of 2010s mainstream feminism, and this like interactive reminder of where my feminism started and how it has grown and like outgrown Rookie and really captured existing as a teenage girl, at least in my experiences, as this like painful, angry, beautiful, gross, exhilarating nuance that it deserves. And so it was just, yeah, very nostalgic for me to return to this. And I hope actually to kind of expand further on this project. Um, so yeah, thank you for your time. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that really fascinating presentation. I really appreciate your notes on form, especially. I've been thinking a lot about TikTok and the experience of what it might be like to what we would usually call a tween or early teenager these days, and what that kind of interaction in a digital landscape looks like in comparison to my own teenage years, which is around the time of Rookie. I also am getting ready to teach Jenny Zhang next week, who was a regular contributor to Rookie. So it was a really great lead in there. So thank you for that. All right, so we will move on to our second paper, which is from Dr. Jennifer Helgren. She is a professor of history at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, where she teaches U.S. history, women's history, and digital history. And her paper is titled Age Segmentation in the 20th Century, U.S. Girls Organizations, Unraveling the Dynamics of Gender, Unraveling the Dynamics of Girlhood, Gender, and Happiness. So I'll turn it over to her. Looking forward to it.
Right. Thanks, Samantha. And thank you, Kelly. That was really interesting, especially your reflections on like your readership as a teen, sort of with a few years to think about the importance of the long form content. And so I'm going to be looking at other programming for girls. And I'm going to take us all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. So let me share the screen. Okay, everybody can see, I suppose. So, and I'm also going to start with a bit about myself. So that's me all the way on the far side with super blonde hair. So when I was 5 and a kindergartner, 1977, I joined the Bluebirds, the division of the National Youth Organization Campfire Girls for the youngest kids. And we named our group the Merry Birds to express our happiness and because our leader's name was Mary. We sat on playful fabric nests that my mother crafted for us from bits of fabric. We sang songs, we played games, we did simple arts and crafts. And of course, the mothers all believed that this was quite age appropriate. So this research looks at two facets connected to the emergence of these auxiliaries. Bluebirds was Campfire, Brownies was Girl Scouts, and Cub Scouts was Boy Scouts. And I'm looking mostly at the US, though I'm looking at the UK a bit as well for context, because the organizations, Boy Scouts gets started in England by Robert Baden-Powell. And then there's a separate development of Girl Guides in the United Kingdom and Canada. And then in the US, the Boy Scouts of America is separate. I mean, they're linked, but they have their own ideologies. So I'll be focusing mostly on US because that's where my research is based, but there's some overlap. So I'm looking at first the emergence of these age stages and age appropriateness as a historical phenomenon. And second, how the concept of happiness was interwoven into these different age sets. I'm contextualizing youth organization publications and internal statements with the literature on age grading and the new histories on happiness and emotion. So when Bluebirds first met in 1912, their leaders hoped it would give girls, quote, the true inheritance of childhood's joys. As we did in the 1970s, they wore costumes, though they're a little bit different. You can see the little girl in her bluebird costume with pasted on feathers there, but they also belonged to nests and they played and they sang a lot. So what intrigued me about this project, if you know my work, it's been on Campfire Girls for many, many years, but really the adolescent girls. And that's what most of us have focused on in the scholarship on youth organizations. And so the age groups, when I started to look at it, were rather surprising to me. So the earliest group was 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds. And so this age group is interesting because, as Claudia Mitchell, Jacqueline Reed Walsh, and Fiona McDonald have shown, in the late 20th century, they emerge as tweens. And there's a great deal of concern, of course, about age compression, the societal expectations and norms about certain behaviors and interests, where the children are taking on previously considered appropriate activities for older age groups, right? McDonald explains that, quote, the teen stage targets girls who no longer consider themselves children, but are not yet teenagers. And tweens, of course, raise many concerns for scholars around consumer culture, media, sexualization of girls, and so on. And so what I'm seeing in the research is that youth organizations help create this age stage. They block it out and they mark it as significant. But they're also working to prevent age compression from happening. They're seeking to separate older girls and younger girls, and their particular concern is to allow adolescents to stay adolescents a little bit longer. And so let me talk a little bit more about that. The early 20th century saw a growing tendency toward age grading, divvying up kids into categories. Yeah, let me show the next slide just to show the major youth organizations correlate with this shift towards age grading. So here are the major organizations and the dates that they're founded. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I do want to point out that the Campfire Girls in the US are the sister organization in the US to the Boy Scouts in the beginning of the 20th century. That's how they were understood. And Juliet Lowe, who starts the Girl Scouts, is much more friends with the British, the British Girl Guides and Boy Scouts. There is there's planning and experimentation for the little auxiliaries in the 1910s and 1920s. And then they're really officially started with formal guides, guidebooks and handbooks and formal programming in the 1920s and 1930s. And I should also say here that all of these organizations were nominally open to children of color, as well as the white middle class girls who were the dominant members of the organization. Overwhelmingly, however, the leaders are white, middle class, and the programming follows suit. And we could talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if you're curious. So the youth organizations in the US especially follow the thinking of G. Stanley Hall, who's working in the child study movement out of Clark University. They're identifying a series of differentiated developmental stages. They're following the height, weight, and cognitive development studies and working to implement those in all kinds of institutional structures. And so youth organizations are just one of those. Initially, national youth organizations did not want the elementary school children to join. The auxiliaries were set up to protect the older youth groups from what, in the eyes of adolescents and many adults, was actually a degrading association with the world of little kids. So what happens is these little kids keep showing up. They want to join with their siblings. And I suspect that a lot of parents are also bringing them along as a practical matter. And so there's alarm, and this is how Campfire phrases it. They were worried that little girls coming to Campfire would make it, quote, a little girl affair. They say that, quote, Campfire girls dislike having their younger sisters copying them. It makes them feel that what they do is babyish. They worried that the girls in the older group would quit before, quote, they are old enough to get the most benefit from it. And then the thinking in the Scouts, Boy Scouts, is quite similar. The wolf cubs, as they were initially called in Britain, was based on the imagery from Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book in the 1910s, and it's quite popular in the UK and Canada. And then a lot of groups in the US start to practice and experiment with the program as well. The Boy Scouts of America director, James West, is adamant that this is a horrible development. He fears that any, quote, cubbing would undermine the older boy program. older boys would grow bored of the program, and the project of developing their manliness would essentially be undermined by these little kids and the presence of women den leaders who everyone assumed would have to lead the younger organizations. So the organization sort of put off the establishment of these auxiliaries until the 20s and 30s. But because kids keep showing up, they really have to do something. And so when they moved to establish these in the 1920s and 1930s, they're also building on shifts in the way happiness is understood. And so Viviana Zelizer's work is useful for me here, as she has described the development of the category of, a protected, prolonged, and sentimental childhood in the late 19th century, in contrast to the economic and the productive child. Other scholars of emotion and happiness, such as Peter Stearns, argue that by the late 1800s, happiness is associated with children. It's regarded as, quote, a solemn obligation as part of preparing successful adults. And it spills over into family, beyond family life, to schools, and of course, youth organizations. Okay, so where do we see it? This is for the older kids. We see it in the Scout laws, and both Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are supposed to be cheerful. Campfire Girls has the 7 lines of the law, where be happy is the final measure, and supposedly comes from all of these other things. And it's also performative. It's for the benefit of others and service-oriented. This is Luther Gulick, the founder of Campfire, who wrote the Campfire Law. He says, once people believed it was girls' duty to be miserable to show that they appreciated the seriousness of life. Now they know that it is their duty and that it may become their habit to irradiate life with their cheerfulness. And Campfire saw happiness as something that could be inculcated. He goes on, though, to say, it inculcates the duty that if we have pain, to hide it. If others suffer in the world, we should be quick to relieve them so far as we can. We have a similar sentiment among the Brownies, and it mirrors the Cub Scouts as well. And so what I'm finding, in fact, is that Campfire tends to focus more on gender differences. Brownies and Wolf Scouts are very similar, which is not that surprising, because there's an idea that, the genders don't fully separate until around the ages of 6 to 8 through most of the 19th century. But here's the didacticism that Brownies were told in their guidebook, quote, Brownies always smile, and if they are in difficulty, in pain, in trouble, or in danger, they don't cry, they just grin and bear it. And there's a story about a kid who breaks his leg. It's a boy, and he doesn't cry. And the doctors ask him why, and he says, well, because I'm a wolf cub. And then the Brownies are told, well, you can do this too. You can be as brave as the wolf cubs. This notion that you can make other people's lives easier, happier by not showing your pain and your suffering. But on the other hand, these organizations, they take the names of sort of fantastical, imaginative plays. The Bluebirds are named after Maurice Maeterlinck's Bluebird of Happiness, the operetta, first shown in 1910. And in the play, these kids go on a quest to find the Bluebird of Happiness. And of course, they find it's been in their bedroom all along, right? And so the programming in Campfire's Bluebirds is very similar to, it follows suit, right? They're looking for happiness in places where they might find it. I'm going to skip ahead and come back to some of these others just to show you an example. So girls, for example, in Bluebirds, are going to find happiness through gendered play. And they're playing with doll houses in this image alongside their mothers to learn the imitative play that is going to guarantee their happiness throughout their lives. And I'll talk, maybe we'll have some time in the Q&A to talk a little bit more about how for the youngest girls, happiness is assumed to be innate and kind of instinctive. And so the name of Bluebird, which is an animal, sort of implies that girls too have these instincts and that we should accept their playfulness, their singing, as just part of their nature. Boys, though, get to be a little bit louder. So this is one of the funniest. The boys are doing here, the Cub Scout howl. They're greeting their leaders by sitting on their haunches like little wolves and yelling as loud as they can. Brownies have a similar one, but they're supposed to act like owls, and they do a to-wit. I can't to-wit, to-woo. I wasn't one, so I don't know how the song goes. And so they are supposed to get a little bit louder till they shriek, and then they're supposed to be completely silent. And I found on the state side, the shriek is more of a UK thing. On the state side, there's much more emphasis on the salute and smile for brownies. So for all of these, kids are getting to express themselves, they're getting to be loud, but the degree of raucousness for boys is accentuated. It's a little bit heightened. Well, add just a little bit because W.B. Du Bois' Crisis had a splinter book for kids in 1920 and 1921. It was also called Brownies. And both Du Bois and the Girl Scouts took the name Brownies from these magical creatures that come from Ewing's, Juliana Horatia Ewing's story, where these magical creatures do all the housework. And then it turns out that the magical creatures are actually children, and that children both find happiness through the housework and through making other people happy. And so Du Bois actually borrows a lot of the same kind of imagery that Girl Scouts and Campfire are using, but he makes it very race specific at the same time. So the Brownies book is full of smiling Black children, which at least one scholar has written about how empowering and counter, how that countered the narratives that were out there at the time. But following the same theme of the bluebird, happiness is within, and it's really quite revolutionary because Du Bois is writing about racism right alongside these messages that for race pride you can look within yourself to find happiness and strength. I think I'm out of time, so I will just say that in the conclusion, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the future research that I'd like to trace these throughout the 20th century. And I'll just emphasize that kids have an important role in these organizations because they keep showing up. They're demanding these organizations. So the children themselves are, in fact, influential in creating these age stages. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was so fascinating. I knew the history of Girl Scouts a lot more, but it's fascinating to hear the further the iterations before that, and to think about, especially what you're saying about happiness being innate in girlhood. I'd love to return to that in the Q&A, because it's yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, and how that is translated into actual girl play in particular, I think relates really well to the conference as a whole. Okay, great. So we have our last paper, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. We already have a couple questions in there, so we'll return to that at the end. But just to introduce our last panelist, is Kathleen Murphy, who is an associate professor of English and Humanities at Community College of Philadelphia. And Kathleen's paper is titled Girlhood and Menstruation. So I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna start from the beginning, hopefully. Okay, sorry. In considering the mundanity of girlhood, getting one's period is both extraordinary and completely ordinary. It is a transition between girlhood and young womanhood. Even though it has been more than 50 years since Judy Blume's Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, which was published in 1970, getting one's period is still stigmatized in our culture as shameful and dirty. Tampons and pads are taxed as luxury items and not essential goods in at least 21 states, unlike toilet paper and even condoms, which are seen as essential goods. However, 3 recent books, Revenge of the Red Club from 2019 by Kim Harrington, Code Red from 2023 by Joy McCullough, and Blood Mood from 2020 by Lucy Cuthu, tackle middle school, high school, getting periods, body image anxieties, navigating friendships and family activism and the social media world that is now an inescapable part of the adolescent and young adult experience. Further, they raise additional issues like that of period poverty, and that since our ideas of gender have expanded, menstruators or people who menstruate can be more than just those who identify as girls, young women, and women, and include transgender folks. These texts show, in the words of Elizabeth Taft, a childhood studies scholar at the University of California, Santa Cruz, quote, a more nuanced and textured picture of girls' multiple identities and their varied relationships to social, political, cultural, and economic power and empowerment, end quote. These texts explore serious issues facing girls and yet leave room for playfulness and laughter. In the Geographies of Girlhood, Pamela Bettis and Natalie Adams explain about their anthology. Quote, the book explores how girls come to understand themselves as females in this culture, particularly during a time when they are learning what it means to be a woman, and their identities are in between that of child and adult, girl and woman, and to explore adolescent female myriad of kid-defined spaces, from bedrooms to school hallways to the internet to discourses of cheerleading, race, sexuality, and able-bodiedness, end quote. Thus, an inherent flaw of my paper is that I'm looking at adult women, Harrington, McCullough, and Cuthu, writing about adolescent female experiences. And yet all of these authors have been very purposeful in creating complex characters, navigating complex circumstances as teens in American society. So just so you have kind of like an overview of what these stories are talking about, I'm just going to briefly summarize them and then kind of launch in. In Revenge of the Red Club, Riley Doon, a reporter for her middle school paper, is part of the Red Club, an unofficial girls' club meeting every Wednesday in the school library, offering menstruation supplies and spare clothes. Her best friend, Ava, an elite gymnast, isn't part of the club because she hasn't gotten her period yet because of the strenuousness of her training. Let's see, changes in school rules enforced after a parent committee meeting target the dress code and unofficial clubs, including the Red Club. The replacement of the newspaper advisor aggravates the situation. Principal Pickford attributes these changes to student complaints. Riley and others protest, leading to unauthorized actions like lining the gym with sanitary pads and discussing menstruation loudly in school in a week of organized activities. Principal Pickford, threatens punishment for further disruptions. On Friday, despite threats, some students wear leggings, breaking the dress code on purpose and leading to suspensions. Riley's mother, initially angry, later supports her. Riley starts a blog after the censorship of her newspaper submissions. And at a meeting, Riley's mother challenges the discriminatory enforcement of rules which disproportionately affect girls, particularly the dress code. Riley discovers Ava's jealousy as the reason for the complaints against the Red Club. She opens the Red Club to all, with Miss Nancy as the official advisor. Riley's blog gains traction, sparking Red Club chapters across the United States and globally. In Code Red, we follow Eden Sorensen, a former elite gymnast now in middle school, whose mother is the CEO of a menstrual products company, who is a speaker at Career Day, which leads to incredible ridicule for Eden and more attention than she would like. Let's see. There's an altercation or harassment with a bully in the school, Graham, and Eden and Marabella, who become suspended. And then Eden is bonding. She's lost her, you know what I mean, like elite gymnast group of friends. So she's negotiating new friendships with Marabella, and they work together at Marabella's mother's food pantry. It's there that Eden learns about an organization called Periods with Dignity, which makes cloth reusable pads, and also they highlight the more inclusive menstruation language. So menstruators, instead of just assuming that it's only people who identify as only girls. A big push or a focus is the activism. Eden becomes more and more involved with Periods with Dignity, which strains her relationship with her mother. They eventually launch a social media campaign and do like a flash mob video, which then goes viral and gets a lot of interest and support with the initiative to get funding for period products. Blood Moon is the story of a girl named Frankie who loves astronomy and has been best friends with her neighbor Harriet since they were young children. There's growing tension between Harriet and Frankie, with Harriet doing some inappropriate and even mean things to people in their friend group. Frankie has a sexual encounter with Benjamin, a boy she likes at school, but while he is stimulating Frankie to orgasm, she gets her period. Since Benjamin is close to his older sister, he understands about periods and says it's no big deal. But then the unthinkable happens. Word gets out, and images of Frankie and bloody fingers go viral in a meme. Frankie is mortified and betrayed. She doesn't know who did this to her, and people are sending her hateful messages, even threatening to rape her. She's too embarrassed to tell her parents. It looks like Harriet is behind the images, and Frankie doesn't know what to think. Eventually, it's revealed that a bully at school, Jackson, hacked into Harriet's social media and posted the images of Frankie and the bloody fingers. Frankie, Harriet, and their friend group, and many girls at school show up at the high school assembly wearing t-shirts they have created saying things like, quote, "I get my period too. It's only blood, no shame," end quote. The story ends with Harriet and Frankie taking pictures of the blood moon in the sky at night through their telescope and in their shared treehouse. Despite steps forward in girls' and women's rights, menstruation and menstrual blood is still seen as shameful, dirty, and/or smelly, which is why Harrington's, McCullough's, and Cuthew's books are so timely and needed discussion of menstruation in positive and empowering lights. As Jen Gunter states in her book, Blood, the Science, Medicine, and quote, "This false notion about menstruation being foul-scented in desperate need of abatement by the legion of feminine hygiene products available at grocery and drugstores isn't uniquely American by a long shot. But I'm not sure any other cultures excel quite as much as profiting financially from it. Many cultures consider menstrual blood to be of the most foul, polluting odors there is, and even some require women to segregate themselves or avoid preparing meals during menstruation. While disdain for menstruation isn't universal, it's very common, and it is misogyny. If you want to control half the population, a good place to start is to tell them, beginning when they're children, that they inherently stink or are polluting. In addition to Gunter's overview of menstrual blood as being seen as dirty and unclean, she adds that in her 30 years as an OBGYN, she doesn't know whether a person has their period unless the person tells her or she notices blood in a physical exam. In other words, in her experience, menstrual blood doesn't have a particular smell, thus highlighting menstrual blood as neither dirty nor smelly. I'm just going to skip a little bit. So in the books, menstrual blood is still seen as taboo and stigmatized. In Revenge of the Red Club, Riley is part of the Red Club, which exists to help middle school girls who get their periods in school, and ends up fighting to make discussion and knowledge of the naturalness and normalness of menstruation part of the school culture. In Code Red, Eden gets her period working at her friend's Marabella's mother's food pantry, and she becomes aware of both period poverty and that individuals who menstruate are not just individuals who identify as female. Thus, Code Red is less about the stigma around menstrual blood than the other two novels. In Blood Moon, menstrual blood is stigmatized. When Frankie gets her period while being intimate with her boyfriend Benjamin, this information goes viral. The stigma is most dramatically shown through the online insults and threats that Frankie receives, including statements such as, quote, "You ugly, filthy hoe, you need to be stopped," end quote. And the new quote, "You slut, bet you were gagging for it," end quote. And then the last one, quote, "Someone needs to rape you, you feminist bitch," end quote. The senders of the messages, presumably boys, find menstrual blood dirty and repulsive and find Frankie's sexuality something to be slandered and threatened with violence. Beyond getting periods as a body image issue, girls and dress codes, which disproportionately impact girls, are highlighted in both Revenge of the Red Club and in Blood Moon. For example, Revenge of the Red Club tells the principal about how she and other students feel about the dress code being suddenly enforced. Quote, "Humiliated, shamed. One girl told me that when she stood in the hallway getting her shorts measured by a teacher with all the kids walking by, she felt dirty. One boy confessed that he felt insulted. He felt the policy assumed boys were weak-minded and easily distracted." End quote. Our culture sexualizes girls and at the same time punishes them for it. As the American Psychological Association report on the sexualization of girls from 2008 emphasizes, the sexualization of girls is harmful, not just for girls and women, but also for boys and men, in part because of the ways that sexualization causes girls and others to objectify girls and women. As sexualized and objectified entities, girls or adolescent girls and their bodies in particular are policed in multiple ways, including dress codes at middle school and high schools, as Riley describes above. In all three novels, the main characters have problems with best friends. In Revenge of the Red Club, Riley's best friend, Ava, gets the Red Club shut down behind Riley's back because Ava feels excluded. In Code Red, Eden has been forced to drop out of elite gymnastic competition due to injury and must negotiate a new friend group, which isn't helped by her mother's disapproval of the group. In Blood Moon, Frankie and her best friend Harriet drift apart and fight before they figure out that Jackson is behind the Bloody Fingers meme going viral. Let's see, I'm going to skip because I'm running out of time. There's activism in all three novels tied to social media. So let's see, in Revenge of the Red Club, the enforcement of the dress code and shutting down the Red Club, the school is also, school newspaper is severely censored. So Riley eventually is encouraged to write a blog, which goes viral. Quote, "By the end of the week, the Red Club had 43 chapters in the United States and 15 more across the globe." In Code Red, of course, they film this like flash mob singing performance, and people post it, and it does go viral across the state, which gets them the momentum to get the initiative signed and put on the ballot. In Blood Moon, the meme of the bloody fingers and the picture of Frankie goes viral, and Frankie is humiliated and ultimately threatened with physical violence and rape, as I noted above. Let's see. Okay. So I wanted to highlight that only in Blood Moon are the negative effects of online exposure kind of other the other references to online stuff are largely positive, but that does not happen in Blood Moon exactly. In conclusion, as Jen Gunter states, quote, "While menstruation isn't magic, it's magical, and it demonstrates the marvel of evolution," end quote. Harrington, McCullough, and Cuthue all explore aspects of girlhood in their novels and center getting one's period as a major aspect of girlhood. While none of them declare menstruation as magical, like Gunter, they also insist that the stigma around menstruation and menstrual blood be stripped away so that girls and boys, women and men can talk about something that may happen 450 times in the lives of individuals with female anatomy, who are approximately half of the global population. And though getting one's period is centered in these novels, it is not the only thing going on in the lives of women negotiating middle and high school. Friendships, family relations, dress codes, activism, social media, and getting one's period are all aspects of the complex lives of the main characters that Harrington, McCullough, and Cuthue describe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Kathleen. I I've been thinking a lot about this sort of idea of periods in particular as a kind of stage point that we sometimes mark as kind of the emergence of into womanhood, which I think is really interesting to imagine these different kind of spaces in which the period of getting your period can also be a place where other types of growth is happening. So thank you for that. Um, so we're gonna move into the Q&A section now. You're welcome to raise your hand to ask questions from any of our presenters, as well as post it in the chat. I know that we already have a question from Catherine in the chat, but I thought that just to get us started as people are gathering their thoughts, I might pose a question to all three of you, and then maybe we can see as the conversation unfolds. So I thought it was really interesting how all three of your presentations are thinking about the phasings of girlhood, right? Or the age segmentation, to borrow Jennifer's term. And it made me think about the various temporalities that are surrounding girlhood as like a concept and an experience, especially when and where it might expand in unusual ways, or end even. Given that this panel is all about learning to be an American girl, right? I wanted to ask, are you seeing your research or even each other's research as places for rethinking these kind of like hegemonic plot points, or we might call stages of girlhood? Just to throw that out there, I saw a little bit from all three presentations on that, particularly related to different forms of girlhood, both for who the girls are and also like what kind of interactions are they making within their own world. Chelsea, does that hit for anyone?
I mean, I can try. I don't know that I've gotten far enough into this research yet to know if looking at the younger set of youth org kids is really gonna shift anything. But because the older kids, the adolescents were such the focus of Boy Scouts of America and Boy Scouts in England, Girl Guides, Girl Scouts, Campfire Girls. It was all adolescents, because they were seen as just having this great potential. G. Stanley Hall saw them as like he had this recapitulation theory, which many of you may have studied Hall, and he believed that every phase of human evolution was lived out in the child developmental stages. And so for the adolescent, it was the move from savagery to civilization. And so it was precarious, it was new, and it was fraught with all kinds of anxieties. And then the younger kids, what will be tweens in the 20th century, they were seen as stable, secure, like the long history of the human race was there, right? And so the youth organizations don't see that stage as particularly dangerous. And they're building these organizations more as a way of protecting the adolescents. They want to keep the adolescents in so they don't leave the organization and then not get this crucial protective shell around them. And so one of the things that I feel like I really need to get at, and I don't know how to get at this, is the younger kids' responses to the organization. Like, what are they actually doing in there? we've been able, we have a lot on what older girls do and think within the organization, but it's so hard to get at 8 to 11-year-olds. Everybody's voices are mediated through these organizations, but especially the younger ones are. So I'm not sure what I'll find, but I've already found some surprises. Like, I didn't expect brownies and wolf cubs to be so identical, so long into the 30s. And I didn't expect quite the same level of didacticism for the brownies as Campfire Girls. So yeah, I don't know, but it's a question I definitely want to explore more. Curious to hear what the other two panelists say.
So part of the reason I bring up Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, is that it's 54 years later and we're still having conversations about that menstruation is normal. Part of the reason the one slide has all the different like phrases or terminologies for getting your period, including, the curse or on the rag or riding the cotton pony, or the red tide. Again, is that we're not really through this. I don't, something that's related is that in the last 10 years, there have been a range of different books that have been published on menopause. And there's actually, there's a relatively new TV commercial about like a menopause medication that people can take. But again, like if you listen to some of these people who are talking about the menopause manifesto and stuff like that, 10 years ago, nobody would touch that with a 10-foot pole because menopause, like menstruation, it is taboo. So I think, getting one's period in middle school and high school is, again, kind of a central identity kind of defining aspect of what girls are navigating. The one image of that's a Girlhood like poster with the white underwear on the clothesline. I mean, that's specifically a reference to, at least in my mind, like getting your period and need to wash the bloodstains out. So I'm not sure I'm answering that correctly. I do have a question that'll be related to this, but I'll come back to it in a bit.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, but it's a hard question, which is part of the reason why I thought it might be interesting to explore. Kelly, do you have any response to that, or?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that like your question is searching for like if we've thought about different stages of girlhood in a hegemonic sense. Like,
Yeah, I'm more interested in how all of your projects are kind of pushing beyond the hegemony in a way.
yeah,
Like when does girlhood end or
yeah.
tweendom begin versus when teenagerdom began, especially with such an archive like Rookie Magazine, and how it kind of accumulated.
Yeah. I think what was interesting and I didn't have time to like explore as much is like the conception of tween was made to market products. Like we did not have a conception of tween until it was like, well, we have to figure out how to market stuff to kids. Let's create this new like pre-teenager dumb spot. And I think and I don't have any I don't have any young kids in my life, and I also don't like consume a lot of material that's being marketed to young kids, and I grew up without a television set, so I was like not in the like Disney, the era of Disney that a lot of people my age were in. But I'm very curious about like what is the thing that's being marketed to the like tween now, about like what does it mean to be a teenager. Because like turning 13 was very important to me because I was like, that's when I become a woman. It was like, I was also like, I will get my period, I will become a woman. And now that kids are experiencing, I feel hopefully like more spaces to be like a fluidity of gender, a fluidity of toys, a fluidity of consumption. Like, I'm curious what kind of materials are being marketed for them. because like fashion magazines are not as much of a thing. And I just remember how much I read those at that age to think about being a teenager. And so I'm relatively new to girlhood studies as a space. And this was also an autoethnography, but like a area of research I would love to, which I'm sure is already being studied, is just like what is the new, like how has the concept of tween grown, and like how are tweens defining themselves? Because I like discovered Rookie when I'd already hit a teen year. And so I was like being a tween, not like without, I mean, there was obviously outside influences, but I was like very removed from a lot of the influences of being a tween. And these tweens are so inundated with the internet. And so I think that like that cusp that a lot of the 20-year-olds are in now, about like I watched I watched the rise of the internet in a particular way. Like I'm very interested in that effect of like young people without growing up perhaps without the internet or with like dial-up internet versus like these kids who have iPads very young, even if they're not on the internet. It's like how is the new tween being created? But again, I don't know if that like totally answered your question, but that is something I'm very interested in looking at.
Yeah, it's also something I've been thinking about a lot as well, especially given the way that TikTok is so ephemeral. Not that it doesn't exist in the same way that Rookie did on the internet, but the kind of, as you're saying, about the long form versus the short form, or the length of time at which something is relevant in a conversation, is really fascinating for rethinking like how we're thinking about these spaces of girlhood. I also want to make sure we get a chance to get to some of the other questions. So I'm gonna keep it to you, Kelly, about Catherine's question in the chat, which is about the funding model behind Rookie. And Catherine says, your presentation makes me realize how Rookie as a project was centered on Tavi's persona. From the outside, the project seemed to be an attainable goal for teens, but I'm sure Tavi was working with a team of people with resources, and reflecting on the individual activism and collective action. I also wanted to point out that you said that you started your own website as well, which might be an interesting kind of tie-in here.
Yeah, Rookie, there's not a lot of information out there about how Rookie was founded. I think it was out of her father's pocket, and that there was, like, it's very clear, like, the Rookie, road trip was founded by it was funded by Urban Outfitters. Like, that was how that was possible. But as far as, like, Rookie broadly, I think that her dad poured some funding in, and there may have been outside funding resources. She was mentored, but again, I don't know if that mentorship involved like giving funding to the site by Ira Glass and his wife. But part of the reason why Rookie stopped was because of a lack of funding, and basically that it was no longer viable, and that they were going to have to start charging people or taking ads on the site, and that the ads on the site that they did take were like very strategically chosen. And so that was part of the reason why like Tavi stopped the site. I think she was also kind of growing as a person, and was sort of growing away from Rookie towards like new projects, because she was merging more into her acting, and she's like a professional actor now. But it's not actually super clear. And I do think that's also something that it's like, it looks like this very community-centered space. And it's not that it wasn't, but also like you can't ignore that, Tavi was a white middle-class child in the suburbs. And that was part of the reason probably why she was noticed, like, even though she wasn't on an algorithm the way that TikTok is, like, and then shot to fame. Like, there are other young girls out there who are also probably writing about fashion. It's just like, who gets the attention and how can they capitalize on that attention? And so, yeah, it was a really interesting space when you think about like how conceptually it was being run, because visually it always reminded me of like going to a community center and there just being like a lot of crafts on the table. And like that was something I think was very intentionally cultivated, but there was obviously a lot of adults behind the scenes helping Tavi like run that. So I haven't been able to find a lot of information about the practicality of like picking it up and running it. So I think it was mostly funded by her dad, but I don't want to like quote me on that because it was hard to find any information at all on it.
Awesome. Um, I will open it up to other questions. Feel free to raise your hand, or also put your question in the chat, if you like.
So I actually wanted to go back to Kelly's response before the funding question, because I think whether we like it or not, like the sexualization of girls is a big deal. So I'm dating myself a lot, but I'm gonna tell you a little story. So my children are turning 20, 22, and 24. So approximately 20 years ago, I had an infant and a 2-year-old who were both in diapers, right? And the 4-year-old was out of diapers. And I don't, many of you are too young to remember this, but at that time period, low-rise jeans and bell bottoms were in fashion. And I had gone into Target to look for clothes for my children, and there were low-rise pants that I refused to even consider for 2 children in diapers. And I remember wandering around the store and being like, we need to leave because there's nothing in here that is appropriate for you to wear. And the other thing that I found fascinating was that they had neon boy toy shorts and matching athletic bras for 1, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and 4-year-olds. You know, there's a 3T, 2T, 4T. And it's just like, well, they don't need a sports bra. And what are they doing in boy toy shorts? So, like, I can only imagine, do you know what I mean? Like these are young children you're targeting and sexualizing. But the impact on teens, I think, is crazy. And I mean, not only are the labels or talking about menstruation or menopause, but the labels slut and whore are still disproportionately damaging to young girls and young women, more so than they are to boys or men.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I actually was just talking about in a class period that if you measure young boy shorts, like so-called boy shorts against young toddler girl shorts, that the toddler girl shorts are like 2 to 3 inches smaller. So we still having that problem with clothing. I think the thing about like for me, Rookie introduced me to a lot of ways about like to talk about what does it mean if you are called a slut, and like that, was written by a girl who had not yet experienced anything sexual but had been decidedly like labeled slut. And I think the interesting thing again about long form content, and I don't have any young people in my life who are like directing me and showing me any other sites besides TikTok or Instagram, so I reference TikTok and Instagram a lot, is there is a level of like, not nuance, but like I guess nuance in that there was more space to explore the levels by the length of the articles that Rookie had, whereas like TikTok is so rapid and so quick. I just wonder like how that has what impact that has on girls and on just like young people in general when they're kind of like discovering different things for the first time, like I did, because that was really what Rookie was about discovery. Is like, if they're going, oh, maybe I can do this thing, like maybe I can engage in this behavior, or maybe like, do I not have to engage in this behavior? Is this something that because I feel like with TikTok, it assumes that everyone is doing a certain behavior, whereas with Rookie, like Rookie gave me the space to be like, oh, not everyone is doing this thing as a teenager. And so I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but I think it's like echoed in a lot of the ways that we direct stuff at tweens, is like, well, but everyone is doing this. And where is the space, which might exist, to be like, actually, there's a lot of different ways to be both a tween and a teen, and you can kind of like figure it out. But I'm not in a lot of spaces with tweens and teens. I don't know where they're kind of like figuring out that nuance, and like how to like discover and work around those labels and that sexualization and their own self-discovery.
So I do have a question. In some of the research I've been doing, so apparently the word vagina in the early 2000s became like a taboo topic. Like you're not allowed to mention it. So it's not allowed to be in advertising, even for menstrual and period products. So I don't know whether you've seen the Summer's Eve All Hail the V. I mean, they're talking about the vagina, but they can't say the word, which is fascinating. So I've been trying to figure it out, like what actually happened and when in the early 2000s that made that like a taboo word that you couldn't say.
Was it Eve Ensler's vagina monologues? Like, what did that,
Yeah,
like,
because
late
that's
90s?
earlier.
Yeah, but
There's something that happens in the early 2000s, I think.
I was just thinking maybe it becomes enough people are using it by then that there's some backlash by, yeah, I don't know.
I think I'm too young
Okay,
to kind of
sorry, it's just a
know. So there might be there might be audience members that have a better, I just like, I'm 25, like, I know that there was a lot of shame, and I know that that was like something I was like, knew that that was a word I wasn't supposed to say. But as far as like knowing why, like, I don't think I don't have enough lived experience to know, or historical archival context. I don't know about you, Jennifer, if you like, if there's anything that you have that makes you have an answer at all, or any of the audience members, or even Samantha.
I can't think of any personally. I mean, I have been thinking a lot about and maybe this is because of, I don't know if people have seen the Nickelodeon documentary series, but I would highly recommend watching it. But it does seem like like very early 2000s are the point in which children's cable TV really like hits its running, is really hit the ground running. And I wonder if that in some ways has something to do with it. I know that it's not necessarily totally related, but I do think it's fascinating how like the more that these at least on screen or in the media, these versions or these stages. I mean, I can think of the early 2000s as the point in which Lizzie McGuire says something very, she says, "I want a bra," which is like a big moment. And yet nevertheless, what you're noticing about the vagina, kind of like saying vagina kind of exits or it kind of disappears, is really interesting. So maybe it has something to do with that, but I can't think of a specific reasoning. I mean, there's also the fact that it's about 10 years right after Monica Lewinsky, which maybe is another thing that could be as like a media spectacle, right? But I'm not entirely sure. But if anyone in the audience has any ideas, would very encourage you to speak.
Yeah, I'd also suggest, you've got the George W. Bush administration. Maybe there's some regulations in the FCC, which again, to me would suggest backlash, but I'm not sure.
There's also that rise of like the concern about teen pregnancy. Like there were more teen pregnancies, but there was definitely a hysteria around teen pregnancy and like the prevention, and like that massive skyrocket of abstinence-based sex education. So like that also could be something where you know might have played into that, to like not naming body parts as body parts in health class. Because I know like in my health class, as a young kid, like we didn't name body parts, but I also grew up in rural North Idaho, so we were not going to space. It was kind of just like a useless class anyway.
Yeah, and speaking as someone who grew up in urban Chicago, I also didn't have that. So it might, you don't know, it might be a more culturally relevant thing than it appears to be. But anyway, we are at time, so I'm gonna close this out. Thank you all so much for these fabulous papers and this great discussion. I really enjoyed myself, and I hope you all did too. And looking forward to maybe seeing more of you at other panels. So thank you again.
Thanks, Samantha.
Thanks.
Have a good one.